Good evening. Welcome to the August 17th meeting of Troy City Council. I'm Marty Baker, President of Council. Please silence your electronic devices for the duration of the meeting. We will begin with the invocation by Mrs. Lynn Snee, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Gracious God, we thank you tonight for the blessings you have given all of us, the blessings you have given us as a community. We pray that you will watch over those of us who have to make decisions tonight, watch over those who serve both here and in other places in this world to keep us safe. We pray that you will guide all of us as we continue to seek to do the best things for our community. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Tremblay.
Here.
Mr. Swayzer.
Here.
Mr. Heath.
Here.
Mrs. Snee.
here.
Mr. Phillips.
Here.
Mr. Twist.
Here.
Mr. Kendall.
Here.
Mrs. Oda.
Make a motion to excuse Mrs. Oda.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mrs. Snee to excuse Mrs. Oda. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Tremblay.
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer.
Yes.
Mr. Heath.
Yes.
Mrs. Snee.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mr. Kendall.
Yes.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mrs. Oda is excused.
Tonight, Mayor Beamish has a proclamation to present. Mayor?
Thank you, Madam President. Today, as we all know, we live in a great country where we have lots of blessings, but there's still needs out there that represent certain citizens of our population. And today, I think Bishop Ketwick is here. If he would come forward, I think Dick Steinman is here. Would they come forward? I'd like to read not the whole proclamation, but parts of it. That starts with, whereas in Ohio, nearly 1 of 6 residents, including more than 1 in 4 children, live in hunger. And whereas with more than 9 million visits last year, the Ohio food banks and pantries need help serving those families. Whereas the Ohio Association of Food Banks Network distributed over 173 million pounds of food at the pantries and soup kitchens last year, most ever distributed in the history of their network. And whereas volunteerism strengthens communities, addresses vital societal concerns and conditions, and enhances quality of life for all of us citizens. And whereas the city of Troy continues to support those in need through the community food pantries and soup kitchens. It's now therefore my privilege to present this proclamation that proclaims September 1st through September 30th of 2015 as Feed Ohio, not only in the city of Troy, Ohio, but throughout our state. And I recognize Feed Ohio to be the worthy, faith-based, statewide initiative, and I encourage all of our citizens to keep getting involved, volunteering, and helping wherever we can to the individuals and families struggling with hunger. I'd like to present this proclamation to you, and best wishes as we continue to serve those less fortunate. Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to present that proclamation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. We also have a public hearing tonight on Ordinance O26, 2015. Mrs. Knight, would you please read that ordinance?
Yes. Ordinance authorizing the City of Troy, Ohio to execute and deliver a contracting political subdivisions agreement in connection with the issuance of revenue bonds by the Dayton Montgomery County Port Authority, the proceeds of which shall be used to finance a project to be used as a multifamily housing residential rental facility, constituting a supported living facility for lease to Troy Care 2015 LLC and declaring an emergency.
I declare the public hearing open. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in favor of this ordinance?
Good evening. My name is Kip Wallers. I'm an attorney with Ice Miller. We are bond counsel to the Port Authority and to Story Point for this project. The purpose of the public hearing is to satisfy the requirements of the Internal Revenue Code for the issuance of bonds. The Port Authority is going to issue these bonds to finance this project in the city of Troy. There will be no liability. With respect to the city, these bonds are payable solely from revenues from the project, which are going to be provided by Story Point. It is not a pledge of the full faith and credit of the city or of the Port Authority, but solely of the corporation. This hearing is a requirement of the Internal Revenue Code because these are tax-exempt bonds, and Congress has stated that before these kind of bonds are issued, that the community where the project is to be located needs to consent and be all right with the Port Authority issuing those bonds.
Okay.
Are there any questions? Thank you.
No, I don't think so right now. Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favor of the ordinance? Anyone who wishes to speak against the ordinance? Declare the public hearing closed. Mrs. Knight, please read a summary of the minutes of the August 3rd meeting of Troy City Council.
Minutes of Council, August 3, 2015. Committee reports. Community and Economic Development Committee recommended legislation be prepared to approve an enterprise zone tax abatement agreement with ARC Abrasives, Inc. and ZA60 LLC. Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing a contract for the sale and purchase of real estate with Paul R. Huelskamp in the amount of $1,500,000. Law and Ordinance Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing agreement with Troy Main Street related to the 2015 Taste of Troy event. Streets and Sidewalks Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing a facilities encroachment agreement with CSX Transportation related to the McKay Road Improvement Project. Utilities Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing agreement with Frontier Communications for a telecommunications upgrade to the city's network. Resolution number R39, 2015, Enterprise Zone Agreement for ARC Abrasives and ZA60 LLC was given first reading and was adopted. Resolution number R40, 2015, Facility Encroachment Agreement with CSX for McKay Road Project, first reading and adopted. Resolution number R41, 2015, Agreement with Frontier Communications for telecommunications equipment and service, first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 022, 2015, an agreement related to the Taste of Troy event with Troy Main Street to include a beer garden was given first reading and was adopted. Ordinance number 023, 2015, contract for the purchase of real estate for municipal use was given first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 024, 2015, reappropriating funds related to the contract with Frontier was given first reading and was adopted. Following various comments, council adjourned 7:26 p.m.
Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Move to accept the minutes as read.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Twist to accept the minutes. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
Our first committee report tonight is from the Finance Committee and Chairman Mr. Tom Kendall.
Thank you, Madam President. We do have the one report, and it regards the agreement concerning bonds issued by the Dayton Montgomery County Port Authority for the Story Point project. Committee members Kendall and Swazer met August 12th to consider regarding an agreement with the Dayton Montgomery County Port Authority related to the Port Authority issuing revenue bonds for the financing of the Story Point development project. In that the project will be located within the city of Troy, IRS regulations require the city to hold a public hearing and to approve a contract related to the bonds issued by the Port Authority for the project. The bonds are not issued by the city, and the city has no responsibility for the financial viability of the project. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the execution of an agreement by the City of Troy in connection with the issuance of revenue bonds by the Dayton-Montgomery County Port Authority regarding the Story Point project, so that the bonds may be issued without delay and the project proceed. We support emergency legislation. And this is respectfully submitted by Mr. Swayzer, Mr. Tremblay, and myself as chairman.
Are there any questions from council on the report? Thank you, Mr. Kendall.
Thank you.
The next report is from the Personnel Committee and Chairman Mr. Alan Clark.
Thank you, Madam President. We have one report tonight. We have two recommendations. The subject of the report is salaries for elected positions. Committee members Clark and Kendall met on August 6th regarding the salaries of elected positions. The salary for the positions of mayor, auditor, and director of law were last adjusted effective 2011. The salary for the positions of council and council president were last adjusted effective 2007. The salary for the position of treasurer was last adjusted effective 2009. Salaries for elected positions cannot be adjusted to be effective during a current term of office. Recommendation is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared adjusting the salaries for the elected positions to be effective in 2016 based on the percentage of prior increases given to city employees from 2012 to 2015, with the exception of that for treasurer, which will be effective commencing the year 2018. The other recommendation is it is a recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared adjusting the salaries for the elected positions to be effective in 2016 based on the percentage of prior increases given to city employees from 2012 to 2015, with the exception of that for treasurer, which will be effective commencing 2018. Those percentages are 2.5%, 2.23%, 2.25%, and 2.25%. And this is respectfully submitted, Mr. Kendall, Mr. Twist, and myself as chairman.
Are there any questions from council members on this?
Madam President, is this
Mr.
two pieces of
Schweizer.
legislation?
It,
I think it's one piece of
one piece of
legislation
I thought you said it was two.
no, there's two recommendations.
within it. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Clark. The next reports are from the Streets and Sidewalks Committee and Chairman Mr. Bobby Phillips.
Thank you, Madam President. This committee met August 12 to consider an agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation, which will designate the city as the local public agency or the entity in charge of administering the Troy Recreational Trail Project in state fiscal year 2020. 3 areas of recreational trail have been identified for resurfacing under this project. ODOT will fund 80% of the eligible costs up to a maximum of $249,040. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to enter into LPA federal local LET project agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation for the Troy Recreational Trail Project. This is respectfully submitted to Mr. Heath, Mrs. Snee, and myself as chairman.
Do any council members have any questions? You may continue, Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, ma'am. The committee also continued meeting on August 12th on a second piece of legislation regarding the preliminary consent legislation provided by the Ohio Department of Transportation for a resurfacing program for state fiscal year 2016, which will include North Market Street from Water Street to Staunton Road. The city's share of this project is 20%, currently estimated at $10,700. This work would not commence until after the 2016 Strawberry Festival. If the project is not completed prior to the start of school year in 2016, the project will be coordinated with the Troy schools. It is the recommendation of this committee that the ODOT preliminary consent legislation for this project be approved. Based on the ODOT format, we support emergency legislation, and we note that final legislation will be presented closer to when ODOT will be bidding the project. Again, this is respectfully submitted by Councilman Heath, Councilwoman Snee, and myself as chair.
Are there any questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Phillips. We now open the meeting to citizen comments. There is a 2-minute time limit at this point in the meeting, and Mr. Livingston is our timekeeper. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments related to the agenda items this evening? If so, please come to the microphone and state your name and address before addressing council. There will be time at the end of the meeting for further comments and questions. Okay, seeing none, then we will move on to resolutions and ask Mrs. Knight to please read Resolution R42, 2015.
Resolution number R42, 2015, a resolution authorizing consent and cooperation with the Ohio Department of Transportation for the bridge deck resurfacing project and paving of North Market Street from Water Street to Staunton Road within the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. The city will be paying 20% of this project. This is the first reading.
Is there any discussion from council on the resolution?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Kendall to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R43, 2015.
Resolution number R43, 2015. Resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to enter into a LPA agreement with the Ohio Department of Transportation for the Troy Recreational Trail Project. This will be a project to be bid in state fiscal year 2020. The city will pay 20% of this project, but will be the lead agency. This is the first reading.
Any discussion from council?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Tremblay to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
The resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Ordinance 025, 2015.
Ordinance number 025, 2015. An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of notes in the maximum principal amount of $1.5 million in anticipation of the issuance of bonds for the purpose of paying the cost of improving the city's recreational facilities by acquiring interest in real property together with all necessary and related appurtenances thereto and declaring an emergency. This is providing the funding to purchase what is known as the Hules Camp property. This is the first reading, and this was recommended at the prior committee meeting, or prior council meeting.
Are there any questions from council?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Twist to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the ordinance. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Ordinance 026, 2015.
Ordinance number 026, 2015. Ordinance authorizing the City of Troy, Ohio to execute and deliver a contracting political subdivisions agreement in connection with the issuance of revenue bonds by the Dayton Montgomery County Port Authority, the proceeds of which shall be used to finance a project to be used as a multifamily housing residential rental facility, constituting a supported living facility for lease to Troy Care 2015 LLC and declaring an emergency. There was a public hearing on this evening. This has no financial responsibility for the city, and this is the first reading.
Are there any questions from council?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Clark to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the ordinance. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read ordinance 027, 2015.
Ordinance number 027, 2015, ordinance establishing salaries for certain elected officials. The elected officials' increases would not be effective until a new term would start. This is the first reading.
Are there any questions or comments from council?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Heath to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
No.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
No.
There are 2 noes for suspension and 1 person absent.
It's not suspended.
Failed suspension.
Has to have 7 votes.
Okay, this will go to a second reading then. Mrs. Knight, please read ordinance 028, 2015.
Ordinance number 028, 2015, ordinance changing the zoning of in-lot 6517 in the city of Troy, Ohio from M2 Light Industrial District to OC1 Office Commercial District. This has been recommended by the Troy Planning Commission. There will be a public hearing at the next council meeting. This is the first reading.
And this then also will go to another reading. That completes the business portion of tonight's meeting. Mrs. Knight, are there any communications or announcements?
No, they're not.
Mayor Beamish, do you have any comments this evening?
Just a couple quick ones. Air Force Band to Flight. We've had the 2 Army bands this summer. The Air Force will be coming with their Systems Go. That's Sunday, this coming Sunday, 7 o'clock, Prouty Plaza. And a lot of people have been asking about the Troy High School football schedule. The first game is on a Thursday this year, August the 27th, and it's at Wayne. It's Chaminade Julienne, and they have to share field. So I think that we ought to make sure everybody understands there is not our opening season does not start on a Friday. It starts on a Thursday this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Director of Public Service and Safety, Mr. Titterington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have nothing this evening.
Thank you. Director of Law, Mr. Livingston.
Nothing this evening, Madam President.
Thank you. And City Auditor.
I have no
Comments this evening. Thank you. I just wanted to mention and thank everybody that came out for the Mayor's concert last evening. We had a beautiful evening, some good music and great crowd, so we appreciate everybody's attendance. Are there any comments from council members?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead. Madam President, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that came out to the Festival of Nations this past Saturday. We had we had a great turnout. The weather turned out to be amazing for us. Just wanted to thank the city employees that came out and helped set up, tear down. The hockey team came out and did a lot of work. So really a lot went into it, and it turned out great. So Thank you to everybody that came out. I know I saw multiple people here. A lot of them, some of the people in the audience as well came out. So turned out great. Another year down.
Thank you for all of your work on that. Mr. Phillips?
Thank you, Madam President. This is for Mr. Titterington. I did receive a letter this evening at my desk here from a Ken Davis at 1361 Essex Court, and he was complaining about trash bins being left by the crew on trash pickup day, which is Wednesday at Kensington subdivision. He goes on, and I will give you the letter. He goes on and explains a bunch of this stuff here. I will say that since I do live in that area, I have not noticed this personally, and I do travel around early in the morning on trash pickup day and watch. Generally, it's the wind that blows trash cans and empty recycling bins around, but if the question could be asked, that probably would be appropriate.
Okay, not having seen the letter, I'm assuming that there's issues with the bins maybe getting thrown or the wind throwing it, and we do remind the staff periodically before they go out to be conscientious about that, and we can certainly have that done again.
Sure. Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Any other council members? Kevin,
Madam President.
Mr. Clark?
Thank you. Just two brief comments. First of all, I want to congratulate Officer Jim Richardson on his retirement from the police department finally, and he is going on to do better things, and that's good. He had a good career. Also, congratulations to the police department. There was an officer on foot patrol for the farmers market on Saturday, and there was a lot of positive comments about that, so it's good to see our officers patrolling on foot downtown Troy. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council members? Is there any comments from anyone on staff this evening? Does anyone in the audience have any comments this evening? Please come to the microphone and state your name and address.
Josh Havener, 6605 Free Road. It's Pickla. Hold that against me, please. You guys, I'm like I said, Josh Havener. I'm Troy Firefighters Local 1638 president. You guys recently received a letter from Mr. Titterington that included our rejection letter to the MOU. We received a similar one from all the fire department members did from Chief Simmons. Those letters that letter, I guess, kind of painted us in a bad light. We're not sure kind of really why it had to resort to this. And me personally, I think it kind of painted me in a bad light, like I was doing something wrong. I kind of take that personal. I do this for free. I'm not some like big union boss, anything like that. That being said, there was some misleading information in there about the union meeting. In particular, that night we had 20 members present at the time of vote out of 34. So it was definitely a majority. I mean, we were just shy of 2/3 majority, actually. There were 12 copies made of the MOU, and they were passed out, distributed among those 20 people. That night after Chief Simmons and Patrick were up there, after they left, our meeting ensued. We had a motion was made to basically stop the part-time stuff before it started, after reading the MOU and listening to them. We had a lengthy discussion after that motion was made and seconded. There was an option given for a ballot vote. Nothing was said. We also, the option was thrown out to table it until the following meeting to give guys time, and nobody moved on either one of those two. At that point, we took a vote. Like I said, we had a lengthy discussion, but at that point we took a vote. Typical, all those in favor say aye. There were a lot of ayes in the room. All those opposed say nay. No nays. It was silent. At that point, to me, that's a unanimous decision. We're governed by bylaws. Everything we did in that meeting that night was in the constraints of those bylaws. It talks about that study, the Novak study, in that letter. We could debate that study all day. But if you guys would, look into Clear Creek's study. They just recently got one, and I know you guys know kind of about Beaver Creek study already. But Clear Creek's study was kind of intriguing to me at a point, I mean, not to get into too many details, but they told them that they were adequately staffed with 13 members on duty for approximately 1,600 fire calls, or medic calls, I'm sorry. Where they told us that, you know, we were adequately staffed for at 8 to 11 per day for 4,000 medic calls. And if you read into that even more, it says that we could do 2 to 3 times that amount. It's kind of hard to grasp that when what they told Clear Creek. Throughout that process, we felt like Mr. Tiddington was the one that kind of drew the line in the sand. He said that he addressed all of our concerns, and if that was the case, then we probably would have signed that MOU. We wanted contract language, and he said he would not put anything in the contract because he could never get rid of it. We wanted a ratio of part-timers to full-timers, and he said he would not do that. You know, that was a couple issues. I took that MOU, I forwarded it on to our attorney, and at that point he basically said that we were crazy if we signed that MOU or any other MOU. In his opinion, the MOUs don't hold any weight, and that's, our attorney versus, your attorney's kind of, those guys could probably go all day on the same thing. All that being said, still our biggest concern is the safety of the citizens and the firefighters. We still hope to move forward and talk about full-time options. There's still some things that we could do, especially going into contract talks right now. And plus we did make a kind of a promise to the citizens when we hit the streets and obtained signatures and stuff for the referendum. That being said, I appreciate your guys' time, and like I said, we still would like to move forward, with a full-time option. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that has any comments this evening?
Hi, I'm Katie DeLand. I live at 2831 Parkwood Drive here in Troy. I know I've talked to a lot of you on the phone, in person. Some of you have met with us personally, so we do appreciate it. I'm here on behalf of Carriage Crossing Subdivision. We have a number of residents and neighbors here at this meeting. So we're trying to make this concise picture off. I'm trying to make this concise because I know that you guys are still in the information gathering process as well. So we're trying to kind of work together on this. Obviously, we have learned about the plans for the water tower to be potentially constructed in our neighborhood park. This has us upset and concerned for a number of reasons. We're not trying to make this a not in my backyard argument, or this, we don't want to see it, it's ugly. We're really coming at this from a very logic-based argument. We have some true concerns about the environmental aspects as well as the engineering, and then also recreation. It's a park, and we really do have some concerns there. So we know that you guys have set aside some time on September 2nd to specifically address this issue. Mr. Heath was great in meeting with over 100 residents in Carriage Crossing last week, and I think a lot of the biggest concerns were voiced then. So really I wanted to do two things today. I wanted to present you guys a formal petition, as formal as it can be, of over 120 signatures of the residents of Carriage Crossing, and a number of signatures gathered by parents who routinely use our park that maybe do not live in Carriage Crossing but come for football or soccer or cheerleading practice. So I can give this to Sue at the end. And then also I just kind of want to summarize some of the biggest questions that we heard at that meeting with Brock last week, that I've heard through email and through neighborhood meetings. So I will just kind of give you kind of a rundown of our biggest concerns in hopes that we can, and I will email you afterwards, in hopes that we can kind of continue this flow of communication that has been opened, and we do appreciate that. I know at the onset of it, we were kind of taken aback, and I think maybe the media portrayed this as further along as it was. So we do appreciate the steps that have been taken to kind of rectify some of our concerns and to open those lines. But again, we want to kind of make, sorry, I'm getting my email pulled up. some of the biggest concerns. So here are the questions that have cropped up the most, and I think that deserve probably the most attention. Do we have a topography of the area to determine elevation for best positioning of a water tower? And I think maybe this is the crux of the issue. We have a lot of smart people in the neighborhood, a lot smarter than me. But I think that they're looking at it from a really practical sense. If this is a water pressure issue in Troy or a water capacity issue in Troy, where is the smartest place to put this water tower? If it's where it's designed to be right now, then I think that's an easier thing to swallow for us. But if it's not, which we have a hard time believing that it would be, that's a bigger issue. So maybe it's the cheapest land right now because it is city owned, but is it going to be the cheapest in the long run with modifications that we believe will have to be done to the existing land and maybe down the road? And I think that we can all agree that most cities, when you go down the highway or visit other cities, water towers are most commonly found at the highest point in the city, and that's for a reason. So we would just like to determine what's the layout of the city, where are the highest points, and where does Carriage Crossing kind of lie in those? Are there plans to modify the existing detention basin and retention pond that exists there, and what are the costs associated with that? Will this tower service, for a fact, the Carriage Crossing subdivision? Many of us have talked to a lot of you, and we've heard mixed reviews on that. So will our neighborhood be, in fact, serviced by this specific water tower? What landowners have you approached? When were they approached? And were any prices negotiated? We understand that a number of landowners were approached, but we would like kind of some context behind that. And are they currently being reapproached? I know when I talked to Mr. Titterington last week, he said that there are options on the table and they are looking at the viability of some of these, and we would like to be assured that this is actually in fact going on, that there are other options being explored, because I do know that in my backyard right now there are survey stakes and flags and random white trucks out there. So we want to be assured that that these same studies are going to be taking place in other lands, and this just isn't going on here and kind of a sure shot there. So, and what does this tower? Why does this tower need to be so tall in relation to the capacity? So it's 0.75 million gallons. It's 200 feet tall. I Wikipedia'd it, and that's a fact. Wikipedia is all true. And the tallest water tower in North America is 220 feet. So I don't know if we're like in the running, if that's what our game is, but that seems excessively tall for a pretty small water tower in relation. I know up in Sydney there is a water tower that holds 2 million gallons, and it's only 80 feet tall. So again, I'm not an engineer, but that seems maybe a better strategy on whatever they're doing or wherever they found their land. And what is the plan to accommodate removing the existing green space? When I left my house tonight, the exact land that is in question is filled with football players practicing, and after they leave, there will be cheerleaders and soccer players there. So that park, every square inch of it is in use. I've got small kids, and I know that many of you, that finding free land and practice area it's a fierce competition in this town. So Carriage Crossing, removing green space just seems to be very contradictory to the purpose of recreational usage, which I think was the original intent of the park. Further questions, which are a little bit more specific, but we just want to kind of make sure they're out there to get answers to. So current subdivision regulations call for 3% open space, not including detention areas. Our park is currently 10.2 acres, of which 2.6 acres is set aside for detention. From all the documents that have been sent and that we've gathered, we can't tell if the total development was just Carriage Crossing or if it also includes other lands, including the subdivision to our south, which a portion appears to be to drain through our park. So we would just like to see the development agreement to assure that these proportions are correct and that the land in question is not just Carriage Crossing. We want to see what land is actually included in this development agreement. And my last question, and I promise I'll wrap it up, one of the points that we have been told over and over again is that the tower is being constructed to improve water pressure and fire flows in Stonebridge. However, when we look at the water master plan, the proposed improvements indicate very minor improvements in the fire flow to Stonebridge with the tower. In fact, poor water pressure is very common in Troy, It also seems odd to us that Stonebridge is very close to the current Stanfield tank, yet has poor water pressure. Would a booster pump solve this issue? Was this also considered? According to the master plan, no fire flow test appears to have been performed in Stonebridge, and we would think that would be critical. And then finally, what effects have the recent 12-inch water main installed along Washington had on the Stonebridge subdivision? So these are questions, I think, some for your city engineer, and then some for you. So again, like I said, I'll kind of summarize all these and send you yet another email. And we do look forward to the September 2nd meeting. And then I open it up to any other questions from our neighbors that maybe have some follow-up questions, or not follow-up, but maybe questions that I've forgotten. So again, thank you for your time. We look forward to working with you on this.
Thank you, Katie. And any other comments? Anyone else have anything?
Chuck Adams, 2911 Parkwood Drive, live in the Carriage Crossing subdivision. Kind of wanted to echo what Katie had to say. She's done a good job leading our group. I wanted to thank council and staff for listening to our concerns. So far, the conversation's been actually pretty excellent both ways, and we do feel like people are starting to listen to us. We were caught by surprise with the information about a water tower perhaps going into Carriage Crossing Park. I just wanted to reiterate what Katie said. I think there's 108, maybe 116 homes in that subdivision. We had more than 100 people show up at the residents of the neighborhood show up at a meeting with Brock last week to discuss these concerns. We wanted other people to come, but we know with public records laws and public meeting laws they couldn't come, so we understand. But I just wanted to let everybody know, by now all of you have met or been contacted over this, so I'm not going to reiterate all the problems Katie brought up or all the concerns we have. There are others, and I know those will be shared with you at the public information meeting in September. I'm told that we're going to receive a letter telling us the date and time of that. I know as a resident I have not received a letter telling me of the date or time. I spoke to other members today, residents today, and neither have they. So I'm sure that's forthcoming. Since most of you have all these details, we'd like to let you know that there are many valid reasons for not putting a water tower in Carriage Crossing Park. Katie discussed some of them this evening. A lot of them are discussed in the consultant's information that the city's commissioned. And we'd like for you to review those extensively and ask yourselves if this water tower, which is almost 200 feet high, belongs in a neighborhood park anywhere in Troy, much less Carriage Crossing. I'd like to let you know that on behalf of my family, and I feel many others, currently we're very concerned that this is going to be a tower that's going to be forced on the neighborhood with not as much input from citizens as we would like. And we're hoping to resolve that by attending council meeting and have other meetings with our ward councilmen and meetings with the rest of staff and council as well. So that's what I have, and thank you for your time.
Mr. Titterington, that meeting has been set for September the 2nd, I understand?
September 2nd at 6:30 p.m.
6:30 p.m.
We are planning on having that at Concord School.
At Concord School.
However, given the area involved and the potential number of residents, that can hold 350 people. We may anticipate more than that. That's why we have not sent the letters out yet with the invitations. But as soon as we confirm the location, we are saying Concord School as of now, and if nothing changes, then that is the venue. But as soon as we confirm that, finally, then the letters will go out. We don't want to send and then have to resend again.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Madam President.
Could you hear all that in the back? Meeting September 2nd, 6:30 is what is set at the present time, and they are firming up location, potentially Concord School at this time. But you will get your letters as soon as city staff can get that confirmed.
Madam President. Are we able to televise that at all or not? If it is at Concord School, are we able to do that?
Not anything live or live streaming. We may be able to videotape it. We can look into that. I'm not going to promise that we can do it,
Okay.
but if we can, we will.
Okay, thank you.
Go.
My name is Deborah Billheimer. I live at 2824 Parkwood Drive. I also live in Carriage Crossing. Katie has mentioned both most and did an excellent job of what needs to be discussed. But one thing I wanted to add as a realtor, which is my profession, the land where the park is very low. And so if there was a water tower with cement, that is actually going to cause a lot of flooding in a lot of properties at Carriage Crossing, which could devalue the properties in Carriage Crossing. So in my profession as a realtor and plus a resident, my concern is the values of the property could go down because of the water tower. And that's just something I wanted to make mention to you or bring it to your attention. Okay?
Thank you. Any further comments this evening?
Madam President, if I may.
Mr.
I know
Tiverton.
there are a lot of questions, and we're taking notes. We intend on answering all of those questions on September 2nd. And in addition, the consulting engineer who has been analyzing and has made the recommendation on this project, he will be there that evening as well. And so he will have all of the technical calculations, and we will have the maps available at the venue, several copies so that people can see them, and we will do our best to explain where we're at, how things work, answer all of these issues to the best of our ability.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any comments or questions this evening? Thank you all for attending tonight's meeting. Have a safe and peace-filled week. Meeting adjourned.